Hello friends, welcome to our YouTube channel. Today we're going to discuss about a very important environmental topic of the physiology, that is environmental physiology. So there are most commonly three types of altered environment. In that we have to know our physiological considerations, that are high altitude, deep sea and space physiology. See, our physiological condition changes in most commonly the three environments in the level from the earth. The first one is high altitude. In high altitude the physiological changes happens. In deep sea and in the space also physiological changes happens in our body. So what kind of physiological changes happens and what kind of disease associated with it and what is the treatment of that diseases, that we going to discuss in this module. So the first thing is high altitude. What is the difference at the sea level and at the high altitude in the atmospheric pressure and in the composition of gases? So let us see. The atmospheric pressure at the sea level is 760 millimeter of mercury, whereas the high altitude barometric pressure decreases. The composition of oxygen at the sea level and at the high altitude is the same, that is 21% of oxygen. The partial pressure of oxygen at the sea level is 160 millimeter of mercury, whereas the partial pressure of oxygen at high altitude decreases, that is known as a one important phenomenon, that is hypoxia. What are the compensatory changes that happens in responding to long-standing hypoxia? That phenomenon is known as acclimatization. The first thing happens in acclimatization is increase in pulmonary ventilation. That is the earliest response. Hypoxia stimulates chemoreceptors that initiates chemoreflex and that will lead to hyperventilation. Hyperventilation will lead to respiratory alkalosis. Hypocalcemic tetany happens and that will lead to compensation by kidney, and kidney will lead to bicarbonate excretion. The second thing happens in acclimatization is erythropoietin. There is increase in the level of erythropoietin that will lead to increase in RBC, so that the oxygen carrying capacity of the lungs increases. Third one is vascular endothelial growth factor that increases, that is angiogenic. The fourth thing happens in acclimatization is increase in diffusion of gases and diffusing capacity. And the last thing happens in acclimatization is cellular acclimatization that will lead to increase in activity of mitochondrial enzymes that will lead to increase in oxygen utilization. What is high altitude illness? High altitude illness is divided into three types, that is acute mountain sickness, extreme form of acute mountain sickness, and third one is chronic mountain sickness, also known as Monge's disease. So let us discuss these three as a difference. Acute mountain sickness occurs in 6 to 12 hours of ascent to high altitude. Extreme form of acute mountain sickness that happens due to ascent at high altitude, but that has additional features include edema in lungs and brain. Chronic mountain sickness, or also known as Monge's disease, that is characterized by excess erythrocytosis. What is the clinical feature of acute mountain sickness? The clinical features include non-specific symptoms that are nausea, vomiting and confusion. Extreme form of acute mountain sickness has two important clinical features, that is high altitude pulmonary edema and high altitude cerebral edema. Third one is chronic mountain sickness or Monge's disease, that is characterized by pulmonary hypertension and cor pulmonale. The treatment of acute mountain sickness include descent to the lower altitude. That is a very simple method to treat the acute mountain sickness. Most of the cases that resolves spontaneously. Treatment of extreme form of acute mountain sickness that includes descent to lower altitude that is the first thing that you have to do. Then additional treatments you have to do is oxygen supplementation. You can give a calcium channel blocker like nifedipine, and you have to give steroids like dexamethasone. Treatment of chronic mountain sickness or Monge's disease include venesection and a drug known as acetazolamide. Now let us talk about our second environmental physiology, that is deep sea physiology. Deep sea physiology, important workers include in this type of environmental physiology. They are employments like Kaizen workers, military operations and recreationals. Deep sea has high barometric pressure. At sea level, the pressure is 760 millimeter of mercury, that is considered as 1 atmospheric pressure. At 10 meter deep down from the sea level, the pressure increases to 2 atmospheric pressure, and at 20 meters deep from the sea level, the pressure increases to 3 atmospheric pressure. So there is a one disease that is known as decompression sickness, also known as Kaizen's disease, that is related with this physiology. It is also known as diaberism. So decompression sickness or Kaizen's disease or diaberism, these all the same phenomenon. In high barometric pressure, gases are compressed. If ascent happens rapidly, that will lead to decompression and nitrogen comes out as a bubbles. What are the clinical features of decompression sickness? Nitrogen crosses blood-brain barrier, that will lead to nitrogen narcosis, that will lead to euphoric state. Bubbles can happen in joints, that will lead to pain and bends. Bubbles can happen in lungs, that will lead to shortness of breath, that will lead to choking. And the last thing, that is one important cause of death in case of decompression sickness, is air embolism. How will you treat decompression sickness? Decompression sickness treated by hyperbaric chamber, that will lead to slow decompression of gases. Let us talk about our third very important and last physiology of environment, that is space physiology. Space physiology, there are 3 types of gravitational forces act in that. The first one is positive G force, that is the huge G force that acts from head to foot, that will lead to venous pooling of blood. Venous pooling of blood, that will lead to decrease in cardiac output, that will lead to decrease in brain blood flow, that will lead to unconscious state, also known as blackout state. Second force is negative G force, that is the huge G force from foot to head, that will lead to increase in venous return. Increase in venous return will lead to increase in cardiac output, that will lead to increased cerebral blood flow. Increased cerebral blood flow, that will lead to congestion of eye and brain vessels. That state is known as red out state. In positive G force, the state is unconscious blackout state, and in negative G forces, the state is red out state. And the last one is zero gravity or microgravity force. In that gravity force, 4 phenomena happens. The first one is loss of calcium and phosphate, that will lead to loss of bone mass. Second thing is loss of muscle mass. Third one is decrease in RBC, and the last one is decrease in work capacity. So this is all 3 types of forces that are gravitational forces that acts in the space physiology. In space, the acclimatization happens through these 3 forces. So this all concludes the environmental physiology. From the multiple choice questions point of view, many multiple choice questions can be asked from this topic. So this is an important topic from MCQ perspective. So if you like this video, then hit on the like button, comment on this video, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you.